Hello, everyone, and happy Friday. Welcome to Coffee Break. My name is Angela, and today we're going to be talking about why XMP files matter, what they do in Mylio, why they're necessary, all that good stuff. Before we dive into today's presentation, I do want to let you know about some of the other things we have going on for you here at Mylio. So we conduct a lot of live sessions to make sure you're getting your questions answered and that you're comfortable using Mylio photos. So to facilitate that, every Tuesday and Thursday, I host a live Q&A session. This is for anyone who's using Mylio to come and basically ask me anything that's even remotely related to photography. We can talk about family history, organization, photo editing, camera gear, how to do whatever in Mylio. We can do some light troubleshooting. Any of that stuff is welcome. So on Tuesday, Thursday, whether you're brand new or you've been with us for a long time, please feel free to drop into those sessions at 11:30 a.m. Pacific or 2:30 p.m. Eastern. On Wednesdays, we have started a new session, and these are specifically for people who are just getting started with Mylio. So if you're wondering how to get your pictures into Mylio, those basic organization questions, how do I set up a vault, how do I do imports, how do I get stuff in off my phone, all that good stuff, Lori is hosting a session every Wednesday. And again, these are open, ask anything sessions, and that's also at 11:30 a.m. Pacific, 2:30 p.m. Eastern. On Fridays, we host these coffee breaks, which are short tutorials. And next week, we're going to be talking about batch metadata editing. So how you can edit once, apply to many, and accomplish quite a lot in a short period of time. So we're going to go into all of that next week. That'll be next Friday, 11:30 a.m. Pacific, 2:30 p.m. Eastern. So with that, let's go ahead and jump into today's presentation. If you have questions about what I'm talking about, go ahead and put those questions into the chat. I'll answer them at the end. And if you have other questions on other topics, we can tackle those as well. So let's go ahead and switch over to our presentation, which is XMP files explained. What we're going to do today is go into what they are and why they matter. So let's start off with first, what is an XMP file? So XMP is an abbreviation for Extensible Metadata Platform. You don't need to remember that, but some people like to know what's going on behind the scenes. So I wanted to let you know what that term stands for. And really, it's just a small text file that lives in your file system next to your photo. And it holds all of the information about your image. So any changes you make in Mylio photos, such as adding a keyword, a rating, or a caption, those get written to that XMP file that sits next to your photo. One of the things that I think is really great about Mylio, it is what we call non-destructive. So when you bring an image or any file into Mylio photos, Mylio doesn't make any changes to that photo file itself unless you explicitly tell it to, which is why we use these XMP files. It stores all of those changes in this tiny little text file that sits next to your photos. The other brilliant thing about XMPs is that they are an industry standard format. So by using an XMP, especially for common metadata like a keyword or rating or a caption, other applications can read that. So you're not locked into using Mylio forever. We hope that you do. But there's other tools out there, and you might have many tools that you use. And the beauty of XMP is it's industry standard. So as long as that little text file stays next to your photo, that can be read by a really wide variety of applications. So what's inside of your XMP file? I mentioned keywords, star ratings, color labels, any of that kind of organization that you add in Mylio, that's stored in your XMP. Additionally, things like titles, captions, copyright information, other descriptions, descriptive metadata also travels with your photos. Other important things like you spend a lot of time face tagging, all of those facial recognition tags that you've gone through and confirmed in Mylio, those get saved to your XMP, as do geolocation information. So if there wasn't already location information embedded in your file when you imported it, so if it came from your phone, that's probably already embedded in the file. But maybe you have something from a mirrorless or a DSLR camera and you added location information in Mylio. That also gets saved to your XMP files. And of course, pick flags and any visual edit adjustments that you make in Mylio, all of those are inside that tiny little text file that sits next to your pictures. So this is what an XMP file looks like. I took this screenshot off of one of my pictures, and you can see it's just a text file. I opened it up with the text edit app on my computer. It's built into the Mac OS. There's a similar text editing application in Windows, so you can always right-click on one of these files and take a look at exactly what's inside of this. Now, some of these fields, as I mentioned, are industry standard, means they are readable by other apps. Some of them are Mylio-specific. So let's kind of go through this. You don't have to necessarily recall this, but it's good to know some of the information that Mylio saves to XMPs are universal. And then some of them are Mylio-specific. Mylio does the best it can to follow the standards of the Family History Metadata Working Group standard. So this is a standard that's being more and more adopted by a wide variety of applications and services, especially with the family history, in the family history genre. So we try to make things as universal as possible, but still there are a few things that only relate to Mylio. So let's go ahead and take a look at this. So things like your date, time, your GPS, title, subject, regions. This is where you have your face coordinates, the orientation, whether it's portrait or landscape, and things like that. Those are industry standard fields. Things that are Mylio specific, you're going to see here, there's a bunch of these here that start with MY. These ones over here, these are all Mylio specific, and these are things like fuzzy dates. So if you add a non-specific date in Mylio, like a season or a decade or something that's not a timestamp with a year, month, day, hours, minutes, seconds, any of those non-specific timestamps are what we call fuzzy dates, and those are applied in the Mylio section. So it's still in your metadata. If for some reason you ended up having to rebuild your Mylio library later on, that information's still saved there, even if the Mylio application, something happens to it. Your pick flags, those are unique to Mylio. Your edit settings, so these are your visual edits. If you go in and you increase the saturation or you bring up the brightness, those kinds of things also saved in your XMP. And then this is just a Mylio internal tracking number. So you can see there's a handful of Mylio specific fields over here on the left. EXIF is usually information that comes from your camera, and you have other fields here. So you can go in and take a look at that. It's not really meant to be easily human parsable. It's not something you're going to need to dig into, but I wanted to let you know what was involved there so you have a better idea of why they are important. So what travels with your pictures and what stays in Mylio? So those industry standard fields that we talked about, those can be read by a wide variety of different applications. So your keywords, ratings, color labels, titles, captions, face tags, GPS, copyright information, those are all industry standard fields that can be read by a wide variety of applications. The ones that are unique to Mylio are things like fuzzy dates and visual edits. Additionally, albums, calendar events, and categories are organizational structure that live only in Mylio. They are not saved to XMP. So if for some reason you take all your files with your XMPs and you go use something else and you decide later on, I want to come back to Mylio, and you start fresh and you bring those XMP files with you, all of your ratings, keywords, color labels, titles, captions, all of this, and your fuzzy dates and visual edit settings from Mylio are in that XMP file, and Mylio will pick right back up. The things that are unique to your catalog that stay in Mylio that are not saved to XMP, hopefully they will be in the future, but albums, calendar events, and categories. These are unique to the application itself. So a couple of things to note when you're exporting. When you export a new file out of Mylio, Mylio creates a new image. So export means you're taking what Mylio knows about and you're creating a brand new copy of that file. So when you export, you don't have to have the XMP. Mylio bakes those changes that you've made in Mylio into that new file. So any metadata that you choose to include, Mylio will bake that into that new file. And that's what you can possibly send off, via email or upload to socials, or, put onto a share drive or a thumb drive and hand that off to a friend or family. And as I mentioned earlier, Mylio follows the standards set by the Family History Metadata Working Group. So again, trying to be as inclusive and industry standard as possible, because we don't own your images. We don't want you to ever feel like you're locked with us. We want to make a program that, basically lets you have the freedom to use your stuff however you see best fit. So one of the questions that I get really frequently is, I only see XMP files in my folder. Oh my gosh, my pictures are missing. And, feelings of panic start to ensue. So you can see here in this particular folder, this is a folder that is local on my MacBook Pro. You can see it's down here on Macintosh hard drive. And all that's in this folder are XMP files. The reason for this is because of how Mylio handles my files. I have external vaults set up. So what Mylio does is my computer is set to be space saver. So it's going to take things that are big files and keep them on my vault devices that are external to my computer and only keep essential files on my MacBook Pro. And because these hold my metadata, those are considered essential. So XMPs will be in folders and your pictures might be living on one of your external drives. That is Mylio functioning normally. Your originals are safe elsewhere. You haven't lost anything. So that's not something to be frightened of. It just means that Mylio is keeping the metadata on every single device, but depending on your sync policy, that original quality file may or may not be there. So your phones, your tablets, and your computers by default are all set to space saver. And what that means is Mylio is going to keep the catalog, the database file that underlies everything that runs Mylio. It's going to keep thumbnails of your images, so teeny tiny files, and it's going to keep these XMP files, your metadata. All of that will always be on every single device that you add to Mylio Photos. On other devices, like your external drives, you might designate that as a vault. A vault is set to hold everything, including those original quality files. So this same folder will appear on your vault, and in addition to those XMP files, will have those original quality files. So on my computer, I definitely don't want to keep this folder always on my computer. As you can see here, these are 8mm converted old family videos. Those files themselves, the original quality files, are quite big. So Mylio is managing that space for me and only keeping local on my computer the XMP files so I don't run out of hard drive space. This is perfectly normal and nothing to be afraid of. So when you see a folder in your Mylio structure here, so you can see this is in the Mylio folder, you see a folder that only has XMPs, don't panic. Go grab one of your vault devices, go into that same folder that's mirrored on that device. Your originals will be there. So if you need to have those original quality files stored locally on your computer, you can adjust your sync policy. There are easy ways to do that. Let me jump over here to Mylio real quick. And we're going to go over to the folders view. And if you have a folder of images that you always want to have available in full quality on your computer, there's this little icon here at the top of each folder. And you can go into a subfolder and do this too. So right now it says use device sync policy. My sync policy is space saver. But let's say I want to have these available to work with even when I'm offline, even when I have no internet. I can say store original files locally, and that's going to go ahead and keep them local on this computer. Now, when I do that, it's going to go ahead and put those files back next to those XMP files. So Mylio takes care of moving all of those things around for you. And when you see a folder full of XMPs, it is nothing to worry about. So does the XMP travel with the photo? So that's another question I get really frequently is, I'm moving things around in Mylio. Does Mylio move the XMP with the image? So if I take one picture in Mylio and I move it to another folder, that means you want to make sure that XMP is going to travel with it so it doesn't get disassociated from that image. And yes, so if you are moving or renaming things inside of Mylio, Mylio takes care of either moving or renaming the XMP so they stay paired properly together. It updates all of the references, so you can be confident that any of those changes you're making inside of the Mylio Photos application are being properly propagated across all of your devices. Now, the thing you have to be careful of is if you are copying or moving things in macOS Finder or Windows Explorer, if you're going to move things, make sure you grab the associated XMP file. If you do not, the XMP might be left behind and it might get disassociated and then you might lose that metadata. So Mylio doesn't know about copies made outside of the app. You need to make sure you keep all of those things together, your file and the associated XMP, keep those together to maintain the data of all of that stuff that you've added. So the best practice is always move and organize files from within Mylio Photos. I say this a lot. This keeps your metadata intact and your library consistent. Now, there are times when you have to go out into the file system and move things around. I get it. Sometimes that's necessary. Just make sure if you are moving or copying files in the file system, grab those XMPs so they don't become disassociated with those images. All right, so saving metadata to the file. This is another thing that people ask about, and because XMPs exist, they can look cluttered in the file system. Don't get rid of them. We're going to cover that in a minute. But if you want to also go into and click on the file itself, and you want to see the metadata changes you've made in Mylio reflected in that actual file, there is an option in Mylio to save metadata to file. Let me show you where that's at really quick. I'm going to go over here to my All Photos view, and it's being slow for me right now. So I'm just going to show you here in the photo menu. Here is the save metadata to file. It's grayed out because I don't have a photo selected at the moment. But if you have an image selected, you can tell Mylio to embed that metadata into that file itself. All right, so saving metadata to the file, not all file types support having your metadata embedded in the file itself, which is one reason why XMPs are important. You can save metadata to the file for JPEG, TIFF, and DNG, but you cannot do that for raw files, PNGs, HEIC, PSD, video files, documents, and so forth. One thing to note is saving metadata to the file does not remove the XMP. Both the embedded metadata and the sidecar are kept. You cannot, or we don't, you can go into the file system and remove your XMPs, but I don't recommend it, and Mylio will simply try to regenerate it. And you do risk losing important metadata if you do that. We're going to go into that more in a moment. And then also worth noting is that doing a save metadata to file will trigger a system-wide sync. So this can slow down your computer considerably if you do this with a large amount of media. Basically, Mylio is going to have to rewrite all of those original quality files, and then that change has to synchronize across your entire system. So if you select a lot of files and choose save metadata to file, just be aware that this can take some time and is going to put a little bit of a tax on the resources of your system. It's not that anything's wrong, it's just you asked it to do a really big task, and I think a lot of people don't realize what all that entails when they say save metadata to file. Don't be afraid of it, just know that it might take a little while to run. So going on to exporting. When you make changes in Mylio photos and you want to take those changes and send them off to somebody else with that file, you have a few different options, depending on what you're trying to accomplish. You might be wanting to share some original quality files with a friend or family member. Maybe you're working on a specific project and you want them to have those originals with the XMPs so they have all of that data. Probably the easiest way to do that is to go into your file system and grab that folder or grab those images with their XMP sidecars and copy that and paste it into the location you want those to go. You also have the option in Mylio to export an unmodified original. What this does is it takes that original unmodified file, it doesn't take the XMP, so you get the file exactly as it was imported with no changes, no XMP, and that's going to export that file and basically make a copy of that unmodified original to wherever you're exporting it to. You also have the option when exporting a new file to create a new file with your chosen metadata embedded directly. There's no sidecar needed. The metadata goes into the file, including your visual edits. So if you made changes in Mylio to brighten things up and add a little pop of color, those changes are then baked into the new file, and that is what is exported. So you have options as to what you include when you export something in Mylio. What happens when an XMP file is deleted? First off, I want to encourage you, do not delete your XMP files, even if they look like clutter. They are essential to keeping your metadata intact. Mylio is designed, of course, to be where you interact with your photos. So you get a program like Mylio because you want to have a tool that's both visual and useful in managing your library. Make use of that, and as much as possible, stay out of the file system, because that's one of the biggest culprits of things that cause people to come to support is usually when they're digging around in the file system and they make a change that looks very innocuous, but it causes problems. So it causes things to fall out of sync, it causes data loss. So Mylio is designed to be your interface for managing your photos. If an XMP file is deleted, metadata may be lost. One thing I will say is if Mylio has the XMP file on another device, it will attempt to rebuild it from that connected device, but recovery of that is not guaranteed. So the best practice is leave your file system alone and work in Mylio photos whenever possible. As I mentioned before, I know there's situations where working in the file system is necessary. Just be cautious. And again, make sure you keep your images with their XMP files together. So another thing that comes up often with XMP files is people find that they sometimes get stuck in syncing. So what you're going to want to do in that situation is you're going to go up into the dashboard on Mylio, into devices, and you're going to take a look at each device card. At the bottom of each device card, you're going to see the number of files remaining to sync. If you click on that, you'll see a little chart that has XMP. It'll show that what type of file it is. Click on the number, and that's going to show you exactly which files need to sync. So a lot of times what you can do, you can just make a small change. So select those images and do something like add a keyword or add a title or a caption. Just some little small change forces Mylio to redraw that XMP file and often kickstarts things to sync. Also make sure your other devices are online. It might be that you had changed something on another device. Mylio became aware of that change, but the file hadn't had time to fully sync. So make sure you bring all of your devices online. And then if something appears stuck, go ahead and try that small metadata change. Other sidecar files. This is something, again, we get asked really frequently. Do other sidecar files also get synced with Mylio? And at the moment, the answer is no. We hope that this will change in the not too distant future. But some other external editors, for instance, create their own proprietary sidecar files. These include .acr, .on1, and other applications. So Mylio cannot currently sync these. They stay in the folder where they originated. If you do a copy or move import, so let's say you've been using Lightroom or Adobe Camera Raw or some other system, you've got these sidecars already in your folder system, and then you come to Mylio. If you do a copy or a move import, these sidecars will be left behind. So you need to make sure that they are brought into Mylio with, Mylio can't read them, but you want to make sure they're in the folders where your pictures live. So if they're part of your workflow, track them manually and keep a separate backup system. That's the other thing is with these other proprietary sidecar files, because Mylio is not replicating them across your system, if you were to have a system failure, your pictures are protected across all of your various vaults, but those other sidecar files with some of those edits from those third-party programs are not replicated across those various devices. So do make sure you have a system backup. I use both Time Machine on my Mac and I use Backblaze to back up my entire system. And that way, if something were to fail, I have multiple points of protection in case I need to ever restore and get back to work. All right, some key takeaways about XMP files. They are small but essential and hold all of the metadata, all of the information about your pictures, and they are synced across devices. So the way Mylio keeps track of all of those changes that you make is it's syncing those little tiny files and instead of having to sync the full image. So that's one of the really powerful things about Mylio and what keeps things running smoothly. Keep in mind what travels and what stays. So things in the metadata that are readable by other tools, things that are not, and then things like albums, categories, and so forth. Those are going to be things that are Mylio-specific. Export with intention. When you go through and do an export to have files to send someplace else, you can choose what metadata is baked in. If you select an unmodified original, those are the unchanged, without anything with it, unmodified original file. If you want the originals with those XMPs, go ahead and right click on the file, say Reveal in Finder, Explorer, or External, and then copy that original file with its XMP and then paste it wherever you need to go. Next one, don't touch your file system. I just told you to do that, and then I say don't do that. So it really depends on what you're trying to accomplish, but as much as possible, work inside Mylio Photos to keep your metadata intact. Don't get rid of your XMP files. They are super, super important. And if you use external editors, make sure you're tracking them, make sure you know where they're living, and make sure you're covered by a system backup. Just a reminder that next week we'll have live Q&A every Tuesday and Thursday. These are sessions you can jump into, ask questions On Wednesday, we'll have a new session with Lori. She is our onboarding specialist. She's also helping out in the chat here. And she's doing live Q&A sessions specifically for new users. So if you're just getting started with Mylio and are wondering, where do I go? How do I get started? What are my first steps? This is a great session for you. There's no set agenda. You can come and ask your questions and she will be there to answer those. Next Friday, we're going to be talking about batch editing metadata. So ways that you can speed up your workflow and accomplish more in less time. That'll be Friday. All of these are at 11:30 a.m. Pacific, 2:30 p.m. Eastern. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and wish you guys a wonderful rest of your day. Thank you for joining me, and I'll see you next time. Bye, everybody.